the educational content is going to be live today, and we want to thank our sponsor for that, Shepherd Audio Visual. So if you can't come to any of our events anywhere that we have them throughout the year, there's usually going to be a live streaming. So, and we thank Shepherd for that. And as many of you know, our Southeast chapter spans over 7 states and Puerto Rico. So this allows our members from the surrounding states to join us for the program today. And thanks for joining us, the live streaming folks. And we encourage you to ask questions. And I want to now, I guess, introduce, to stay on time, Michael Dominguez. But let me give you a little bit of information about Michael Dominguez if someone doesn't already know Michael Dominguez, because everyone seems to know Michael Dominguez. He is Chief Sales Officer for MGM Resorts International. And he is providing the oversight of sales strategies in the MICE and leisure segments, including industry relations, diversity sales, and MGM Resorts events and production services. Michael is also very actively involved in leadership roles in the meetings events industry and currently serves as the immediate past chairman on the International Board of Directors for Meeting Professionals International. Michael's other industry leadership involvement include board positions with U.S. Travel Association, APEX, GBTA, HSMAI, and advisory boards of Elite Meetings, Boundless Network, and Lanyon. Mike has also served on task force positions for PCMA, ASAE, and CIC. Michael was recently recognized in the industry for numerous honors, including Successful Meetings, Top 25 Most Influential People in the Meetings Industry for 2013, 2014, and 2015. What happened to 16, 17? Smart Meetings, 15 Smartest Industry Leaders. HSMAI's 2014 Top Minds in Sales and Marketing, Meeting Focus 2014 Trendsetter, Meetings Net 2014 Changemakers, and the HispanicBusiness.com's 50 Most Influential Hispanics in the U.S. So without further ado, we welcome Michael Dominguez. Thank you.
This is always a fun topic for me. It's kind of what's going on in the industry, and I break it down into a lot of different segments. So I'm taking a look at what we see businesses struggling with, what we see as the hotel industry, what we look at economically, what we look at as far as behavior changes. So it's going to be kind of the gamut. I always say, like, my job is to try to give you a little context around what is going on. Many times in our industry, we've always talked about content is king. We've probably all heard that. I'm a believer we're in a society today that content is not king. Context is. I don't need a meeting. I don't need PCMA. I don't need MPI. I don't need any organization for content. I need it for context. I can literally Google or YouTube anything I want to learn today. But what I can't get is this kind of dialogue to say, what does it mean to me and how do we change personally or professionally? That's what I'm hoping to get to. The idea is these are the things that are going around us. I always call it connecting the dots. You'll read it, you'll see it, but you never put any dots together to say, okay, this is what it really means and this is why I should be looking at it. So that's the intent of what we're going to go through. And if you have questions, please just raise your hand. I don't really care if we break the flow, or I always say, you're not going to break my flow. I don't have any. We're just going to talk. And I'd rather answer the question while you're thinking of it than try to remember later at the end of the session. So, let me start with what all businesses are struggling with, and it's the speed of change. And we're all dealing with it in our organizations, but remember your customers are as well. And I'm a huge fan of the World Economic Forum, and it takes place every year in Davos in January. And it's the best economic minds in the world. It's the world leaders coming together, and they're talking about the next 10, 15 years and what we're challenged with. And this is Benioff, and I love this quote from the World Economic Forum, but speed is the new currency of business. And I'm a firm believer in that. And Meg Whitman, who is the CEO of HP, says it very well. If you think you're moving fast enough, you're not moving fast enough. And that's the world we live in. But let me explain some of that to you. I'm reading a book by Thomas Friedman. It's called Thank You for Being Late. Wonderful book. It's all about the speed of change. The title came from, by the way, he's at lunch. Anybody who's been to New York knows that if you have a 12 o'clock lunch, you're not starting until 12:20. It's just not going to happen. Well, he's at lunch, 12 o'clock. He is waiting for lunch. The person that is coming is 30 minutes late. When the person gets there, he is apologizing profusely. And Thomas Friedman's response was, "Thank you for being late. It was the first 30 minutes I had to think, just to sit and relax and think about what's going on." The reason I point this out, This is the technology curve line, and this is what has changed with all of us on how we consume content in our lives. And I know this isn't a surprise, but what Thomas Friedman has done is he's taken that same curve line that you see, and I have an arrow and a box on where we are in the technology change line, and he's graphed it. And what he did was overlap this other line, which is our ability as human beings to adapt to change. And what you will see is as the line continues to curve and technology moves faster, the gap is going to get wider. Even if you're caught up today, you will be behind tomorrow. And if you're behind today, you're going to be more behind tomorrow. That is the point. And it's going to move at a pace that we can never see. And this is my graveyard of companies, and I keep adding to it. But the point here is you're sitting here, you may be thinking, not me. We're too big, we're too strong, I'm fine. Yeah, all these companies said the same thing. And all of us grew up with these companies if you're over 40. If you're under 40, we'll explain later who they are. But over 40, we grew up with these companies. And my apologies to Sears and Radio Shack, they just don't know they're dead yet, but they're dead. There is no way they're coming back from this. And if you read the news today, it's Sears is putting out their last lifeline, but everybody's telling you it's just they've got to go into bankruptcy at some point. There is no other option. Now, why does that matter? For anyone over 40, we used to judge the economy based on Sears' performance. It was the largest retailer in the world. It was the Walmart of its day. If Sears was doing well, our economy was doing well, and they're losing the company. And I think about a company that is spinning off Kenmore and Craftsman, two brands that are so strong they can stand on their own, and they're losing the company. How bad did you miss the trends that were around us? And I look at Radio Shack. If you were literally over 40 in this room, Radio Shack is where you went for any piece of electronics. If you needed a battery, if you're under 35, these things called cassette tapes that we used to go get in big sleeves, lots of choices. Here's the point, we were already trained. They should have been the Best Buy of today, and they're losing the company. That's kind of where we are when we talk about the speed of change. And there's a chart I usually show. For the sake of time, I didn't bring it in, but it's a Yale professor, Richard Foster, and it's really interesting because if you were on the S&P 500 in the 1920s, you would have remained on the S&P 500 for 67 years. In 2010, it's now 15. And probably the most telling stat of all, 75%, two-thirds of all the companies in the S&P 500 will not be there in the next decade because they can't see the change coming fast enough. And the reason I share all of this, I'm a big fan of John Chambers. He was the CEO of Cisco for many years, 20 years to be exact. He reinvented that company 5 times, but he has a couple of sayings that just really stick. And first and foremost, here are the 3 sayings that stick with me. Disrupt or be disrupted, it is your only choice, but disruption is coming to your life. Make your choice. Don't whine about it when you get hit with it because you chose not to be the disruptor. And that is the only choice you have in today's world. And there is no other option. The other point he talks about, if you're going to succeed in today's world, you need to think like a startup. You know how startups think? They move really fast and they fail often. You know how big companies think? We move really slow and we're risk averse. You know how associations think? We move even slower and we take no risk. That is a challenge with a model that is not going to exist very long. And probably the most telling stat, and this is research that they have done in the industry, and he wasn't afraid to tell his 1,000 top customers at an event one time, all the research tells us that 40% of you in this room will not be relevant in any significant way in the next 5 years because you can't change fast enough. It doesn't mean you won't be around, doesn't mean you won't have a business. You're not going to be relevant to the conversation because you have not changed. Half of you in this room, more than half of you in this room, will hit that category. And it doesn't matter what room you talk to. The research tells us some people really adapt to change quickly, some people don't. And today's world, you've got 1 year. You used to have 3. You have 1 year to catch it, to catch the trend, to catch the competition and get ahead of it. You used to have 3 years. You don't have that luxury anymore. You will be left behind. Again, it doesn't mean you don't have your business. You just aren't as relevant. And I hope that makes you nervous. I hope that makes you uncomfortable because that's the point. You should be uncomfortable every day. If the world is moving this fast, we should all be uncomfortable. I love change. Anybody who works for me will tell you that. I love change. I love looking at the world differently, and I am uncomfortable every day as much as I love it. That's the point. I want to be uncomfortable, and I tell my team often, if you think the grass is growing under your feet, I promise I'm going to mow the lawn. And that is quite all right because we need to be uncomfortable if we're going to succeed through this model. I want to show you a quick video to tell you this isn't new. This is something that's been around a long time, but this video, by the way, was released in 1994 to give you some parameters as far as this not being a new concept.
Here's to the crazy ones. The misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So think different. 1994 release of the Macintosh computer. That's how long this concept's been around. And I always say this isn't new. We all went to school and we all learned about Darwin, and it wasn't the strongest, it wasn't the smartest, it is those that are able to adapt that survive. Today, that's your business model. You're either going to adapt or you will not survive in today's environment, and that is why I show you the graveyard of companies. And this is the interesting part. What we're struggling with today is noise. There is so much distraction in our world today and in our lives, and whether it's social media, whether it's literally face-to-face, all of it is very distracting. We have a lot coming at us, and you have to understand, how are you going to keep attention? And this is everything that happens on the internet every 60 seconds as of halfway through 2018. And you can see there's almost 1 million sign-ins on Facebook, almost 4 million views of YouTube video. And I didn't even put this in here because I don't know what it means to our society, but there's 1.3 million swipes on Tinder every 60 seconds. Not kidding. Every 60 seconds. That's the world we're living in. And the reason I say that is, if you're going to get through the distractions today, I truly believe what wins today is being authentic. It's being real. The companies that do this well are the companies that are succeeding. And there's a couple of examples I can show you, but authenticity is what matters. And this is probably the biggest one, Domino's Pizza. Now, here's going to be something that would be really telling, and I guarantee you nobody would have gotten it right if I asked the question, but if I was going to give you $1,000 in 2010 to invest in any stock, I guarantee you wouldn't have put it in Domino's, but you would have made more money in Domino's than Apple, than any of the FANG stocks, than Microsoft, than Google, doesn't matter. They have had a faster rise when Patrick Doyle came in as president, and he took over their pizza company, and they reinvented it. And what he did was become really authentic. And I always talk about the bravery behind it. He takes over as president of a pizza company, and his first message to the world is, our pizza sucks. It's not a good product. And if you don't know the story behind Domino's, this is the story behind Domino's Pizza.
There comes a time when you know you've got to make a change. You know, you can't lead a company like this unless you love food. I love food. I love pizza. It was about 50 years ago that they started the first store just about 5 miles from here.
Two brothers had a great idea, and they also said they wanted to get it delivered within 30 minutes, and that's something that no one said could be done. In fact, the first pizza delivery vehicle for our company is that vehicle right there. Around in the 80s, we were exploding. We were the fastest growing company in the history of franchise business. Nothing had ever grown like that.
Now we're almost 9,000 restaurants around the world. We love what we do at Domino's.
Pizza, where's the love? How hard? Bread, sauce, cheese, fresh ingredients. Doesn't feel like there's much love in Domino's Pizza.
Domino's pizza crust to me is like cardboard.
Is it hard to watch this stuff?
Yeah, it's hard to watch.
I hear what some folks are saying about our stuff.
Oh, this one's bad. Worst excuse for pizza I've ever had.
The sauce tastes like ketchup.
Totally void of flavor.
You know what? When you first hear it, it's shocking.
The cardboard complaint is the most common one.
This we hear over and over and over.
I mean, that hits you right in the heart. This is what we've done. This is what I've done, for 25 years now.
You can either use negative comments to get you down, or you can use them to excite you and energize your process of making a better pizza. We did the latter.
Most companies hide the criticism that they're getting, and we actually faced it head on.
Some people didn't get us credit for the taste of our product. That's what we're fixing.
They actually had a major change, and there's the slide I was telling you about. That is their rise in the stock market ahead of all the FANG stocks during that same window when Patrick came in. And what changed was they became real with their customers, to be able to admit we don't have a good product and we want to be better. And if you order Domino's today, I mean, they're asking you to go online. They've got a phone number. They want you to call immediately. And if you don't like it, they'll replace it. It is all about the quality of their food today. And I always said I thought they were overreacting because for 30 years they told you it would be 30 minutes or less. They never said it would be good. So that was never their promise. Their promise now is about having a good product. And that's the important shift that we're seeing. And you can see that it matters. But this is hard. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine at lunch today. And it was interesting because I talk about, especially in the meetings world, if you want control today, you need to be willing to give it up. And most of us are in our jobs because we're control freaks. And we're really good. That is not the world we live in. The world today is organic, it's authentic, and when I look at this, and I don't mean blow up the entire meeting, but you should not have a meeting that is scripted from start to finish. There should be, and I always say, go Pareto. 80% of the meeting should be scripted, 20% should be able to come alive. And you don't know what that's going to look like until you start the meeting. That's scary as hell for a lot of people in this room. It's scary as hell for a lot of our stakeholders. But that's the world we live in. But we still have bosses that'll tell us, we're going to be on stage, we're going to be really transparent, we're going to have Q&A, but I want all the questions filtered. That's not transparent. Probably the scariest speaking job I've had, or speaking gig where they asked me, because I never get paid for this, by the way, but the scariest one I've ever done was the CMP Conclave. And it was called Open Mic with Mike, and I was the lunch entertainment. And it was me and the facilitator, and they were crowdsourced questions, and everybody could see it. But when somebody would launch a question, you would get the number of likes, and the number of likes would take it to the top, and I answered every single one of them in the order they came in. I didn't hide from them. I didn't run from them because the questions are being asked whether you answer them or not. So answer the question. You were there. Well, it was, did I look scared? Because I was scared as hell up there, so no, good. Good. But that was organic. It was real. It was natural, and that's what meetings are becoming. And I look at, again, connecting the dots when you look around us. How many of you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge? 115 million it raised, and they have never been able to repeat it. Why? Because it started organically. It started because a friend was trying to help a friend, and everybody picked up. They've tried to replicate it. It's never taken off. And my God, this whole Kiki challenge is driving me crazy. But you look at the song, there was a 90% increase on Spotify the week that the challenge went live, and Will Smith won the challenge, by the way. According to Drake, it was Will Smith. He got the trophy because he climbed up 300 feet on a bridge to do the dance. And the idea was it went viral, and it was organic, and Drake didn't make it up. It was one of his fans on Instagram that Drake, by the way, if you did not hear, wrote him a $250,000 check to thank him for starting all of this. Because the song's not that good. But literally, everybody's singing it when it's all said and done. It's organic today, and that's kind of the point. How do you start to understand that what's going around us is how people behave? And they're going to expect this in our meetings. Really, a lot of complexity out there, and when I look at this, I look at everything that's going around, and this is important. If you're a supplier in the room, your customer today will not be your customer tomorrow or may not look the same. Mergers and acquisitions have never been higher. We have the highest merger and acquisition rate we've seen. We have the highest merger and acquisition rate of all companies over $10 billion. These are big boys. Not that it ever happens in our industry, like a company buying another big company or anything like that. It is happening everywhere. It is happening in bio. It is happening in telecom in a big way. And when I talk about connecting the dots, you may have heard Broadcom and Qualcomm were trying to merge at one time. Broadcom now has bought Workday, not Workday, CA. They actually just bought CA as of last week. We got the notice that CA World was canceling. So here's my example. Whoever has that CA World $4 million meeting, they sent out a notice 5 weeks in advance of it saying we're canceling the meeting because Broadcom just bought us. And instead of flying everybody in and not knowing what we're going to talk about, we're going to wait until after the merger to figure this out. Your customer. CA World's been your customer forever. It's great. Or the conference has been yours for Mandalay. It's been ours for a while. That's the issue. All of a sudden, you have a merger, and it changes. That's the thing we have to be aware of. And when I talk about connecting the dots, Broadcom and Qualcomm tried to merge, and the administration shut it down. And they said they couldn't. But does anybody know why? No? Nope. It's not a monopoly issue. That's what everybody thinks. And thank you very much. You must read the Wall Street Journal, sir. That is the issue. Broadcom is a Chinese-owned company. And the reason this got shut down is something called 5G. We are putting a 5G network across the country that is literally going to be the backbone of our communication system, which also means it's going to be the backbone of our defense system and the defense communication system. Would you want a Chinese-owned company owning the backbone of our communication system in the next decade? That's why it was shut down. And the challenge I have is our media does not tell us those things. They make this out to be political, and I say it's important in today's world to be able to separate policy from politics. The policy made a lot of sense because you would not want a Chinese-owned company owning a communication network that is literally going to run a lot of our communications in the country. That's what shut it down. And it's an interesting one today, and we had this talk that, my frustration today is we have too much media and no journalists. We don't have journalists in the world today, and we need more journalists. I'm hoping to be your journalist to show you this is what's happening behind it. The other thing is cord cutting. Everybody's cord cutting. We want all streaming networks, and this is the interesting thing, and this happened at the end of 2017, and not enough people talked about it. But Disney announced that they were pulling all their content from Netflix. Why do you think Netflix and Amazon are trying so hard to create original content? Because all the other content's going to get pulled. And you don't think that Sony's looking at doing the same thing, Paramount's going to look at doing the same thing, that CBS, NBC, they're all going to do the same thing. Because they know, and Disney knows this, especially if you have kids or grandkids, you are paying for their subscription. Because you are going to pay for all Disney movies. And by the way, Disney only owns all the Star Wars franchise and every Marvel movie ever made. Only the largest moneymakers of all times. If you're going to want to watch them, you're going to pay the subscription. Read an article later, we all cut the cord to save the $140 cable bill. Congratulations, you're going to pay a $140 subscription bill when it's all done. It's not going to be about the money. It's going to be about the convenience of when you want to watch it and watching it on demand. That's going to be the shift. But that was a biggie. And when I talk about the mergers and acquisitions, if you weren't paying attention, Disney and Comcast were battling for 21st Century Fox. Disney ended up winning out. So they have it. You know what they own now? The rest of the superhero characters that they wanted that is owned by Fox, and more importantly, 25% of Hulu, which is distribution. So what you're seeing in the media is content distribution, content distribution. That is the reason now you've got 21st Century Fox and Comcast now battling for Sky, which is a European distribution arm that would keep them growing. The reason I keep talking about the M&As, it's real simple. If we're publicly traded companies, and many of us work for publicly traded companies, we have to grow. And if you can't grow enough organically, the only way to grow is by merging. The only way to grow is by buying somebody else. You grow overnight, i.e. our world, when you saw Marriott and Starwood merge. They grew overnight. That growth is what Wall Street is looking for because it's always year over year. And you look at Time Warner and AT&T, this finally got approved. They were worried. This was the one they were worried about a monopoly. And they actually went through it, and it just got approved, I think, last week. So the merger has a green light, and they're going to be able to move forward. But again, if Time Warner is your customer, AT&T is your customer, I guarantee you their meetings are going to look different once they merge. That's why it's important for us to understand what is going on in the business world. So, speed of change, let's talk about our industry. And our industry is changing very quickly as well. I like to start in 2016 because this chart is just such a good visual. You can see we were up in every status and we set a major record in every major indicator that we measure in the hotel industry. The reason this is important, it looked exactly the same in 2013, 14, and 15. So we had 4 consecutive years going through 2016. You go to 2017, set an all-time new record in occupancy, ADR, and in revenue. So 17 was an all-time record year. We're halfway through 2018. Guess what we're doing? We're setting an all-time record in occupancy, average rate, and revenue. So for everybody in this room, and if you've been doing this a while, you think it's cyclical, you've seen these cycles before. I've been doing it 30 years, and I've never seen this cycle. And I'm going to show you why. It's very unique. There's a lot of nuance. But again, I said this earlier, my goal is to tell you why, not what. Those are the numbers. Let me tell you why they look the way they do. And if you're a meeting professional in the room, I always say this, I'm trying to arm you for your stakeholders because I think your stakeholders are asking you to pull a rabbit out of the hat today. They're asking you to do things that are just impossible in today's market environment because they don't know today's market environment. That really is the purpose. It is not to defend a hotel's point of view because one day I'm going to be here and telling you it's the reverse. I'm going to tell you that it is all relaxed and it's open and go for it. But right now that's not the environment and it's not going to happen at least over the next 12 to 18 months. So RevPAR around the world, to remind everybody, we're part of a global society. You look at what happened globally, everybody is up in RevPAR except the Middle East. Middle East is down for two reasons. One is supply. They have a huge supply growth going into the Middle East this year that's going to drag down the occupancy, which is bringing down RevPAR because it's also bringing down rates. The other part is the Middle East is still in turmoil in a lot of different areas of the Middle East. I don't know a lot of people taking an incentive program to Yemen right now, and that is the issue. It needs to settle down before you're going to see it come back because it was a very fruitful travel and tourism industry that has been hurt by some of the chaos that's going on around it. And the other thing is, remember next year when you start seeing world numbers, you're going to have to normalize for the World Cup. The World Cup was a huge, huge nuance for especially Europe, but mainly Russia. And you can see what the numbers were, the strong increases. But to give you some perspective, this is what happened in the last 3 World Cups, and look at the RevPAR in Moscow's increase versus every other. It was substantial. So understand that when you look at European numbers next year, you're going to have to normalize for that a little bit because it's just not real. You're going to have to remember World Cup's not going to be there. And they always say you look really great in World Cup, you look really bad afterwards because it's a tough comp. Same with the Olympics. You look really good in the Olympics year, and afterwards it's really tough because you have to marry the comp, and you just can't do it. So that's kind of the demand side of it. And I always want to remind everybody that when we look at this demand, when I say this is new territory, you can see here we've been at that 65.5% occupancy for the last 4 years now, and we don't see that slowing down anywhere in the near future. We have never occupied this many rooms in our history in the United States, ever. We've never done it. So we're at occupancy levels we've never seen. Now, when I show this, I have had planners say, so we're slowing down because we're staying at 65%. No, we're opening up 2% more inventory every year, and we're still occupying 65%, which means we're absorbing everything that hits the market when it hits the market. Never seen that in any cycle before. As I said, nuance in this cycle and very different. CBRE will tell you what it looks like, and what I love about this one, in the green column, and I put a red bar around the occupancy side, the 20-year running average is 62% occupancy. We're in the 66% range. We are so far north of any normal averages that, again, we've never been in this territory before. And if you go to the luxury segment, where we have a lot of meeting space, we're literally 5 points higher and at 75% occupancy. And guys, when you get to about 80%, we're full. Unless you want to meet on Thanksgiving and Easter and Christmas, we're full. We've got all that noise that's always going to give us, we're never going to get to 100%. To be at 75%, it means you are struggling to find space and to find rooms in many destinations. This is kind of what's causing it. It's the occupancy. You can see 47 markets have actually declined in occupancy, and only 13 markets increased, but yet RevPAR increased in most of those markets, which means even though we're declining, it's only because of supply. It doesn't mean that our demand is actually going backwards. It's just the occupancy is going backwards because you have more supply in those markets. That's all it is. But this all drives into pricing. And why do I say that? It's economics 101. If I have any frustration in our industry is that we talk about a seller's market or a buyer's market instead of the market. It is market conditions, it is economics, it is business. And we need to start talking more with business acumen to say when I have all-time high demand and no new supply, what's going to happen to price? It's going to increase. It's economics 101. Why we get so emotional about the economics of it is beyond me, except that we're not talking about the economics of it. And when supply will outpace demand, which it will at some point, guess what's going to happen to price? It's going to come down. It's just not there right now because I'm showing you the demand is through the roof. We don't have enough supply to offset it. And I'm going to show you what that demand and supply looks like. You can see this is from American Express. It's telling you what's happened with group rates around the world or RevPAR around the world. You can see it's going to be driven by North America, which means we're going to be the driving force. If you're planning in the U.S. or Canada, we have a higher increase in average rate than anybody else because it's not occupancy that's really driving this right now. It's rate. We're in the rate game at that side. But this is probably one of the biggest shifts. You have new competition for your guest rooms that you didn't have before. And if you look at this chart, the blue represents transient business and the green represents group. And what you will see is back in the day, in 2007, before we fell off the cliff, it's actually 2008, we had 123 million transient rooms in the United States on a 12-month rolling average. Today, we're at 173 million. 50 million more transient rooms in a 12-month rolling average in the U.S. Now, group, we were at 84 million, and we have grown, but we've grown to 85 million. We've grown 1 million group rooms while we've grown 50 million transient rooms. Why does that matter? Because when you're asking for the rooms today, you're battling with that customer. And it's a tough battle because they pay a much higher average rate. And hotels, I always say this often, not every dollar in a hotel is equal. We make our money in room rate. We don't make our money in F&B. We make our money in room rate. And so I'll have a planner, and the reason I'm talking about this is we see planners blowing through their blocks because you've protected yourself for attrition, which I'm not saying you shouldn't, but you're blowing through your blocks, you're calling the hotels, you're saying you need more rooms, and you're being told you can have them, but they're at a higher rate. And you freak out. It's that little freak out moment. Like, okay, why are they at a higher rate? Because of this. This is what's driving it. And the interesting part is I'll have planners come back and say, but I'm giving you F&B. Great. I make 35 cents on the dollar in food and beverage as a whole, which means you have to be giving me $150 per room per night if you're asking me to give up $50 in rate. And in most times you're asking me to give up more than $50 in rate. And the challenge with that is at the end of the day, we are profit centers. We are not revenue centers. It is all about the profit that flows through. And it's important for us to understand, and it's an important message, not every dollar is equal. Room rate is what drives the hotel business, not all the other revenue. The other revenue is important. We just don't make as much profit from it. And when I say that, people walk away thinking we make 75% profit in rooms. No. To actualize the room, we make 75% profit. I still have to pay for accounting. I still have to pay for HR. I still have to pay for marketing. I still have to pay for marketing fees. That profit has to go pay for a lot of other things. But for you to occupy the room, we run that 75 to 80% profit because I have to pay for the shampoos and the labor to clean the room. Basically, that's it. That's the profit we talk about. But I've said this in past, and I've had people say, well, you make all this money. No, at the end of the day, it doesn't all flow through. I have to cover a whole lot of other expenses with that, but that's what drives the building when it's all said and done. And the interesting part is I get asked this question, how long can this last? Well, I'm always a believer that your best predictor of the future is past history. Our longest recovery was between 1990 and 2001, where we grew for 111 consecutive months in RevPAR. You can see right now we're only 98 months into the cycle. We can grow for a few more years, or for another year at least, to get to the record. We still have room to grow. That's the point. And I think we will when you look at economic conditions and you look at supply, which is what we're going to talk about. This is the forecast going into 19. As you can see, occupancy is finally flat as far as we're not going to grow in occupancy. Why? Because look at supply and demand. They're even. So if supply and demand are even, it doesn't mean we're shrinking in actual people wanting the rooms. We're just not growing in occupancy because they're dead even right now. And that's the forecast. But you can see ADR is still growing, RevPAR is still growing. What's also growing is operating expenses and then also operating profit. So that's the demand side of it. I think I've beat the horse to death. It's busy and really busy like we've never seen. Well, here's the challenge. And when you look at the U.S., this chart shows you demand and supply. And the dark blue shows you the actual demand, and the light blue shows you supply. And what you will see is demand has way outstripped supply during this entire recovery. Now, we were all excited because in October of 2017, they actually came together. We were all excited because, okay, that's going to normalize the market, and it lasted for 30 days. And as you can see, they started to separate again. And demand is still outstripping supply. Now, why does that matter? Because we need that dark blue line to come down and that light blue line to go up for about 3 years before you ever feel it. We need to make up all that white space that's here between the blue and the two blues. Does that make sense? That's the gap. And it's not that, okay, we start to get more supply and demand or even, you're going to feel it. You're not going to feel it yet. And for you, what's that doing to pricing in certain markets? This is the important part. These are group ADRs in markets that we see across the board. Not a surprise when you look at some of these major cities and what they do because they have a lot of compression in the cities. But you can see, and this is my point to you with your bosses. Your bosses are going to tell you, I want to be in Boston and I want to be at $150. It's just not going to happen. Now, it may. Let me quantify that. Every city has holes. Every city has soft spots. Every city has an area. But we know that's not the way your boss works. Your boss is saying, this is the date, these are the times, and it has to be right there. And that's when I say they're asking you to pull out the impossible. And it's interesting because you have to get to St. Louis before you get to $140. That's what's happened. Second-tier cities are behaving like first-tier cities when it comes to pricing and demand. And that is because demand is at all-time highs. You don't have many other options. You can see this around the world. Demand is outstripping supply everywhere except the Middle East. One of the reasons the RevPAR is down in the Middle East, which is that middle category right there. You can see it's the only place in the world that supply is outstripping demand. RevPAR is not going to slow down until we start to see that in the equation. Prices won't relax until you see that in the equation. So here's the challenge for everybody in this room. 73% of everything we've built over the last 5 years is limited service. It's a Hampton Inn, a Courtyard by Marriott, a Hilton Garden. They pop up on every street corner. Why? Because they have no overhead and they make a lot of money. And remember, this was a banking crisis. No bank was going to loan on a risky project. What's interesting is big boxes, traditional hotels that you could think of that have big rooms and big meeting space, those are real estate plays. Those are not hotel plays. And nobody was investing in real estate during this recovery. That's why you didn't see these hotels being built. And what do I mean by that? Somebody that owns that kind of box, they're going to hold on to it for 10 or 15 years. It's going to appreciate by $100 million. They're literally going to sell it and move on. It's basically parking their money somewhere as it appreciates. That's different. Somebody that owns a Courtyard by Marriott, they're making money from the Courtyard by Marriott because they make about a 55% GOP in a limited service hotel. I always say if I'm ever going to own a hotel, I'm owning limited service because it really has no overhead because it doesn't offer a lot of service. And that's not being critical of them. It's limited service for a reason. Doesn't have a room service, 24-hour room service. It doesn't have a restaurant, even though nobody's in it, that has to be open. Doesn't have valet service and laundry service. It doesn't have any of that. It's limited service. I also say that's why they give you free Wi-Fi, by the way. But that's a whole nother topic. Here is a really great chart because when you look at this, this shows you what happens as far as hotels that open up that have 50,000 square feet of meeting space or more. We're finally getting back into the 6 and 5 range, but we used to open up, if you go further back, we used to average 10 a year, which means there was a minimum of 500,000 new square feet of meeting space coming into the market. And what you see is between 2011 and 2017, we averaged 1.8. We weren't building any ballrooms. And if you're not building any ballrooms, it doesn't help anybody in this room. That's the issue. The new supply that is coming to the market, we have 1 million more guest rooms and no new ballrooms. That's a challenge. And that's going to continue to be why you're being told no quite a bit. And that is going to, I don't see it changing anywhere in the near future. If you were adding salt to the wound, this is it. STAR also does a map study every couple of years, and I love this piece of it where they basically will tell you that the only growth in meetings is meetings of 1,000 people plus, which means at the time that I have no new ballrooms, the only meetings growing are my largest meetings. That's a challenge. And that's why you feel the rub when you're being told can't do it. My advice, got to get your stakeholders to start moving their booking windows. They got to start making decisions earlier, or you're going to end up in Des Moines, Iowa. And no offense to Des Moines, Iowa. I like Des Moines, Iowa, but it's not the place you take a large convention. That's kind of the point. So that is going to be, I'm sure somebody being streamed, they're going to be yelling at me now. I didn't mean anything to Des Moines, promise. Let's go to the economy. That's the hotel side of it. When I go to the economy, as of August 22nd, we now have the longest running bull run in history in the stock market. It has been on a tear. It is on a tear again. It's well over 26,000. We may cross the 27,000 in the Dow, which didn't think it would be happening that quickly. But here's the interesting part. If you don't follow the market, I always say think of the animals. A bull charges and a bear hibernates. We're either in a bull market or a bear market. An all-time record bull market means we've been charging literally for over 9 years. And it is, again, the longest running bull market in history. Yeah, I do. That's really good. Yeah. No, don't be sorry. I love that it was a question. That's really cool. That's good. Wow, that's a nice break in the program. I like that. That's awesome. No, that is brilliant. And it was a question of all things. This is the other thing that's going on. If you look at personal wealth, consumer confidence was just announced this last week that it was at an all-time high. And when you look at personal wealth, our personal wealth has never been higher. And what does that mean? And I always say this is sometimes what Washington does not understand. Most of us in middle America, our wealth is tied into two things, our homes and the stock market and some type of retirement fund. And the issue is when the stock market is doing well and when home pricing is now rebounded, we have personal wealth. We feel better, we know it's there, and we can actually spend more. That's why consumer confidence is so high, because our personal wealth feels better. In 2009, when everything crashed and your 401ks disappeared, all of us got nervous that we don't have any money. knowing that all markets will come back at some point. But at that moment, it doesn't matter. We tighten up, we bear down because we're like, okay, it's going to be tough selling for a little bit of time. This is really good news for us. 70% of our economy is still consumer driven. So remember that. Consumers feeling good. Why do they always look at consumer confidence? And again, it was announced yesterday, actually. It was on Monday. Monday it was announced, and it's at an all-time high, all-time record. Consumers are feeling really good about everything. Why? Because they have jobs. They have jobs, they have money in the bank, and everything is feeling good right now. So it's going to continue to drive our economy in the short term. Now, we do have headwind. I'm not saying we don't have headwind. Here's part of the headwind is the dollar. We've had a really strong dollar for a long period of time, and when you look at the dollar, the challenge is when it comes to travel, a high dollar means it's more expensive to travel here. People forget that international travel to the U.S. is an actual export, not an import. It's an export because we're taking foreign money. We're getting foreign money for it to come in. So we are one of the largest exports, and the travel is the issue. And you can see if you look at Mexico, it costs you almost 60% more from Mexico to travel here today than it did in 2011. You look at Canada, it's 35%. So basically, it's so expensive to be here. It's one of the reasons you look at Europe this summer. I promise you, you have friends or you went to Europe and you hadn't been in a long time because it was on sale. It was cheaper to go to Europe this summer than it has been in a long time. That's impactful, and that's where we worry about the dollar and the strength of the dollar. And you can see this was through April of 2018, what happened to the dollar versus other currencies. All these currencies shrunk because the dollar continued to grow. Now, why is the dollar continuing to grow? We don't want it as strong as it is, but it's because everybody's investing in us because we're the strongest economy out there right now. We're the safest bet. If you look at some of the chaos around the world, we are the safest place to park money. That's why the dollar continues to grow. And that's always a good sign for us. Good, bad for the economy long term, but it's a good sign as far as the health conditions of our overall market. And this is an interesting one. When I say separate policy from politics, this is a biggie. You've probably heard about we're losing global share of long-haul travel internationally. We've been reading it, and there's all kinds of discrepancies in the numbers, by the way, because international visitation's up. Our share of international is down, but international visitation is up. Well, there's a lot of nuance to those numbers, but here's the important part I want to point out. We started to shrink in international long-haul share in 2015, long before President Trump ever started to tick off the world at times. That's my point. Because you keep hearing this dialogue that this is all because Trump, it's a Trump bashing thing. No, it started to decline well before he was ever president. But if you were to overlap something, you know where that spike is? That's the spike in our dollar in 2015 when we started to lose international audiences. And that is the one thing we've surveyed, one of the largest surveys of international traffic will all tell you the same thing. Number one on the list, and number two, not far behind it, is the strength of the dollar and that U.S. is too expensive. It's the only thing they look at as negatives. Now, the Trump thing comes up, but it's way down on the list, and it's in the teens as far as it even being measured. What is important to everybody is literally what we're talking about, your dollar. How far does it go? And I always think about you. Do you go to a country thinking about their political leader and caring whether they, I want to go to Europe, I'm going to Europe. If I want to go to Italy, I'm going to Italy. I don't really care about their politics. That's the issue. It's not good, by the way. It's not that I like the tone or the message or anything along that line, but my point is it's not what's driving it. And I think it's important to separate the two because if you don't know where the problem is, you don't know how to fix it. And that's the issue. What is really driving some of this nuance? This is the other thing, and this is always fun. How many of you know who this person is? Yeah. Yeah, it's rare. We don't get a lot of people raising their hand, but this is Jerome Powell. And Jerome Powell is the head of the Federal Reserve, and he's probably the most influential person in the world and the most influential person in your life. And it used to be Janet Yellen, because he is going to set interest rates in the central bank. He's going to determine how much you're going to pay to mortgage a house, to buy a car. Everything in your life is going to be dictated around those decisions that come from his branch. And the idea is most of us don't know who he is. The one thing I will tell you, he comes on CNBC literally about every 90 days when he speaks to the Senate. Please do yourself a favor, take 30 minutes, watch Jerome Powell in his opening remarks, and you'll know everything you want to know about the economy. Because his job is to look at all measures of the economy to see, I'm reading the tea leaves to see what it means. His job is to say, don't let the economy go too fast, don't let it slow down too much. That's his job, to kind of keep it right in the middle. So if you want to know what's going on in the economy, take the time when the head of the Federal Reserve is going to speak to the Senate. And it's a lot of fun, too, because you're going to see how he runs circles around all of them. They have no idea. Yes, sir. Knew it was coming. It's not a surprise. He was raising interest rates. He expects 2 more raises. They probably only 1 this year, but they were expecting 2 more raises at least by the end of the year. We knew it had to be September. We thought the other one would be December when it's all said and done. But thanks for the breaking news. That is it. So we know it's coming. But that is, and the interesting thing is it impacts everything, because if you saw some charts, corporate refinance debt was through the roof over the last 6 months. Why? Because a 0.5 percentage point or a 1/4 percentage point on billions of dollars is a lot of money. So all corporations were refinancing before the rates started to go up just a little bit. The reason it matters is what he does, all central banks will follow around the world. They're going to go to the beat of the U.S. central bank. We do run what is going on around the world. We all know about the trade war. We've heard about the China. Look, there's not a trade war anywhere else except right now China. And this is where it was started and where it really was going to be at the end of this. It really wasn't that much about Canada and Mexico, even though we've renegotiated already with Mexico, still negotiating with Canada right now. The Europeans have already come back and said in the next 6 years they will work towards 0 tariffs. So there is no trade war in Europe. They have an agreement that they're going to go towards 0 tariffs. If you're going to have free trade is free trade. Not that, oh, I'm going to charge your product more than mine because I want to sell more of the items. The idea is free trade is free trade. Put it out in the market and let's see where we go. That's what Europe has worked towards. This is going to be a while. And look, short term, it's a trade war. Long term, you have 2 blowhards and they're playing chicken. And at some point, somebody's going to blink. Everybody believes that. If you watch the world financial markets, they all say the same thing. Why have the markets not responded? Because nobody believes that any of these leaders believe this is good long term. This is negotiation that's playing out right in front of us. And you're waiting to see, it's a game of chicken. Who's going to blink first? We just don't know. So it's kind of intriguing for me because I have no idea where this is going to go, but I'm paying attention to it. But before you hear all the noise, take a deep breath. Everybody take a deep breath because it will settle down at some point. And the thought of it is, you've heard we're now getting, as a retaliation tariff, $200 billion in tariffs that are coming back at us from China. That's $200 billion on a $10 trillion economy. It's this much. So it doesn't mean it's not impactful. It's just not as impactful as it might seem. The number sounds big until you put it into the size of our economy. That's the point. Short term, it'll be okay. Long term can't happen. If it does long term, then we'll have a whole nother discussion. But if these are your customers, they're worried about a trade war. Even a short-term trade war, this is going to be an issue because these customers sell globally, so it's a big issue. Tax reform. You know, we've heard about the tax reform. I'm going to separate 2 things. Separate the corporate from the personal. I'm not talking about the entire tax bill, but the corporate bill, and this is the one thing I talk about. Please raise your hand if you know what the I know you will. Please raise your hand if you know what the repatriation tax is. And this is common again. Here's the thing about the repatriation tax. If you don't know what it is hard to have an educated opinion about the bill. One of the biggest drivers of this bill was a change in a 40% repatriation penalty that has existed in the United States for the last 30 years. It's a big shift for all companies. And rather than me explain it, let you have Tim Cook explain it.
If the corporate tax rate is cut, would you expect Apple to use those residuals to add more jobs?
Yeah, I do. I believe that tax reform is sorely needed in this country. We don't focus on the individual side, but for corporations, we think we have a pretty deep perspective on this. The biggest issue with corporations in this country is that if you earn money outside the United States, which most companies increasingly will, the only way you can, and it's taxed in those countries, by the way, the only way that you can bring it into the U.S. and invest is if you pay 40% for us. And this is kind of a crazy thing to do. So what do people do? They don't bring it to the United States. Well, this isn't good for the U.S. There's no tax receipts there, and it's not good for investment in the U.S. And so this needs to be fixed. In my view, it should have been fixed years ago. But let's get it done now.
So one of the reasons I show Tim Cook is if you remove the politics from it, everybody knows he is not a fan of this administration. But when it comes to this policy, he believes it's a good policy. It'll make businesses grow. By the way, he's committed $30 billion in capital investment and 22,000 new jobs from the bill and what they're receiving. So that is what the repatriation tax bill is doing. And what's interesting is when you look at this, the largest companies that have cash sitting overseas are all tech companies. The expectation is 400 billion of it will come back this year to the United States. 400 billion. It's an influx, it's a stimulus without a single taxpayer dollar. That's kind of the point. It's just parked overseas. And if you don't know what happened, the marginal tax rate, we were the highest in the world. And we're competitive. This is not where we want to be number one. But we're number one on this chart. And what happened was with the tax bill, we went from 35 to 22. We're now in the middle of the pack. So the idea is when you bring the money home, why wouldn't you invest it here versus somewhere else, because we're now competitive as the rest of the world from a tax rate standpoint. That's what the bill is. And like I said, I'm separating the personal from the corporate. I'm not even getting into that side of it. But from a corporate standpoint, there's a lot of things that make sense in the bill. And what I like is this is what's happened in 2018, because you're going to keep reading that all companies are doing are buying back stock and they're paying dividends and none of it's going to employees. But you can see the spike in bonus and supplemental pay at the end of 17 and early 18 since we got the rules of the bill. So I'm a data guy. I don't listen to people's opinion. I look at the data. And the data is telling us that a lot of this money is going to employees. Even if it's not going directly to wages, it's going to bonuses and benefits, which still benefits the employees at the end of the day. A lot of it has gone into 401ks. A lot of it has gone into increased matches in 401ks, encouraging people to save. That's good for us long-term as an economy as well. It's good that we have people saving for their future. So that's the U.S. side of it. Globally, we got a lot of chaos going on. Italy has a debt crisis that is, sorry? Oh, I know. Italy has a debt crisis that is really unsustainable. Merkel is in a fight for her life politically, and it has all to do with the migrants. It all has to do with refugees. And by the way, I mean, people really didn't pay attention to it, but Brexit was not an economic vote. Brexit was an immigration vote. And that was the UK saying we want to be able to determine who comes into our country and how many come into our country on an annual basis versus the EU. That's why they separated. And that's why they can't come to an agreement yet. And there has to be an agreement economically, literally by March 2019. It's a struggle because it was never about the economics. They want to be part of the EU. They just don't want to be dictated as far as what's going on with the migrants. Now, the only country that let it continue to flow without any kind of rules in place was Germany. And Merkel is now in a fight for her political life. That's a lot of what's happening in Europe right now. There's a drumbeat towards this nationalism, and the whole idea is we just want to be able to control our destiny, not have somebody else controlling our destiny that really doesn't have the same impact. That is a lot of chaos going in Europe that we have to start looking at. In our own industry, you hear us talk about esports all the time. Many of you probably see me show a video about esports. Look, this is not a trend, it's not a fad, it is real and it's here to stay. And if you don't know much about esports, it's about $1 billion worth of revenue just last year. And you can see how the money comes in with advertising and media rights and sponsorship. It's big time dollars. And when you look at the payouts, as far as the winnings, they're big, they're real sports. Most of you don't know much about Twitch, but Twitch is the YouTube of e-gaming, and it is owned by Amazon. Twitch has a more of an active audience than any social media platform out there. 35 billion minutes watched, you can see 2+ million unique actual broadcasters on an annual basis. The top guy that has subscriptions right now on Twitch makes $500,000 a month in subscriptions. It's real. And for any of you who say, I can't believe people would say to watch them play a game, they're sitting there going, I can't believe you pay that kind of money to watch someone throw a football. It is whatever sport you're interested in. It is their sport. And anybody who's ever played video games, and I used to be a gamer when I was younger, you get to a level and you don't know how to get through it. They're watching the pros to know how to continue to get better at the game. The same reason you would pay someone to teach you how to get better at golf. It is not that different, yet we make it really different. It's just not. It's a different game. These are the top games, and you can see the active minutes watched in those top games. We actually closed down a nightclub in Las Vegas at MGM Resorts, and we opened up a $30 million permanent competition esports arena. It is real. There is real money. The teams that are owned around the world, they're big. And it's not going anywhere. This was my point. It's getting bigger. It's not getting smaller. Major sports leagues are now owning teams. The teams are owned just like if you own the Lakers or you own the Celtics or you own the Magic, you literally own esports teams the same way. You pay their athletes, and they are athletes, because what they do, nobody else in the world can do. They just can't. They're the best in the world at what they do. Winning a team for League of Legends was almost $2 million that they won for winning the World Championship. So it's real money that's behind it, and understand that. Understand that it's not going to go away anytime soon. The other thing, when we talk about disruption, it's tourism right now. Over-tourism is probably one of the biggest things we're talking about around the world. This is a real sign from around the world. People are saying, please go home and quit visiting, because they were never equipped to visit. And what we call it, it's the Lord of the Rings syndrome. You saw Lord of the Rings and people got infatuated and they want to go visit where Lord of the Rings was filmed. Well, those areas weren't designed or have the infrastructure to have thousands of people visiting. And you have countries now saying the over-tourism issue is the issue you're going to continue to see. I did a similar talk about 3 weeks ago, and literally New York Times broke a story that same week, and somebody sent me a note. And it was all about over-tourism. You're going to continue to hear it more and more. Yep. I mean, it's the over-tourism. Yeah. It's the infrastructure. The biggest thing is they don't have it. And I look at think about the trip right now from Manhattan to go from JFK to Manhattan. Now add another 1 million visitors, which we expect in the next 3 to 4 years. That doesn't get any better. We need light rail, we need high-speed rail, and we are well behind as far as a country. We need to get there. The other thing I'm going to wrap up with behavior is, look, don't overthink it, and I think we all overthink things. And the biggest thing, and I've said it often, is you've overthought the millennials. Stop it. Stop it already. The millennials that are the older millennials, and you have to separate them into two groups that are 28 to 30, 35, now 36. If you look at the older millennials, all the research is telling us they are behaving like every other previous group before them, except they use technology more. So get off of it. They're not that different. Please stop that. And it is something we think about. And here's something that'll blow you away. Largest leisure study we did in our industry. What does it say? Sorry, Airbnb, millennials still want hotels. The other study we're looking at, and this would surprise people, you know what's exploded? Travel agents. Travel agents are back in a big way. And guess who the biggest audience of travel agent usage is? The millennials. The people you said would never talk to a human being and they would buy everything online. It is the complete opposite. And, if I hear one more time about hotels, we're building hotels for millennials, they're communal, we're going to change it's the lobby bar and you put plugs in. That is what you've done. It is not that different. And when I started in this business, I had a pager that ran on a battery. I didn't have anything to plug in. But if I needed someplace to meet, we met in the lobby bar because we knew there would be a communal setting. There would be couches and places you could have a conversation. It's not that different. We so overthink it. And I've thought about this with social media because I was thinking about this, with Burt Reynolds passing away. Over the weekend, I was watching Smokey and the Bandit. Well, do you remember in the CB world, they all have handles. What do we have in social media? Handles, where you're kind of anonymous, but you get to talk to people around the world. That was the CB world. That's what occurred to me and that's when my wife's like, you're a freak. I mean, you're watching that, and that's what you're thinking about. But it really did. It occurred to me. It's a handle. We called them handles, and everybody had their own name that they made up, and that's what they used on the CD, or on the CB. So that is, again, us just overthinking it just a little bit. So one thing I say it, and I say it often, get off the demographics, study the psychographic. Get off the age and study the behavior. Study the behavior. If I like mobile, I like mobile. It does not make me 20, 40, or 60 years old. If I like video on demand, I like video on demand. Get off the age. If you will plan your meetings for all behaviors, you'll cover every age group. But quit thinking that everybody behaves a certain way, because the research right now is telling us they don't. You know what you always heard? The millennials are going to jump from job to job to job. They're going to have no loyalty. Median length of employment today is at an all-time high at almost 5 years. You know what it was when the boomers were coming in? 2.8. So I always say the boomers had the same behavior. They're just too old to remember. But it was the same activity during that time frame. The other thing is now, there is something that matters when you talk about generations, and it's context. So if I'm talking about something, make sure the reference point matters, because here's just a great visual that tells you, if you're under 35, you have no idea what the relationship of those two items are. Over 35, we all know, because we've had to wind a cassette tape that is unraveled, and we've used the pencil to ravel it. So have you done it? Yeah. Okay. Good. You're an older millennial, so it's okay. all of this goes back to behavioral science, and behavioral science is where it's at as far as how we're looking at meetings today. It's how we react to environments, how we react to other people. Stay well and wellness is a big deal, but we're actually building space right now that you can see that's about to open at the Park MGM next week. Actually, it's called an ideation studio. But what's really special about it is you can see these tables are about 1.5 feet higher. The chairs are 1.5 feet higher. It's all based on the science that for us to truly engage, we have to be at eye level. And if I'm not at eye level, we're not going to collaborate. I am presenting to you if anybody is up presenting. And this is all psychological. It's not saying that you can't. It's just how human beings are wired. It makes it more difficult. And you can see there's a cutout in the middle of the tables. Why? If you have to go walk all the way around the table to go right up on the board or participate, you're just not going to do it. But if you can cut right through and get there faster, psychologically, you're going to do it. We got into Stay Well. It was all about lighting because we realized really crappy yellow light, which all meeting rooms have, is the reason you get tired. It has nothing to do with your food. It has nothing to do with you ate sugar. You didn't get a good night's sleep. It has to do with melatonin in your body. And all the research has told us we have an optic nerve in our eye that only regulates melatonin and serotonin in our body, or serotonin. And the reason that's important is yellow light literally brings up melatonin. Blue light suppresses it. It's the reason they tell you not to read your device before you go to bed, because it is a blue screen that is suppressing melatonin and you're not getting ready for a good sleep. That is the difference. So we're bringing that kind of light in. With LED lighting today, there's no excuse to have crappy yellow lighting. Doesn't cost me a penny more to switch out the hue of light. And that's not any kind of indictment of any facility because we're all there. But you have to consciously think about, we need blue light to be productive. And I will end with my favorite quote of all times, because I believe it in today's world. It's Alvin Toffler. He's known as a futurist, but in today's world, illiteracy has nothing to do with your ability to read or write. It has everything to do with your ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. We're great at learning. We're great at relearning. We are bad at unlearning. We are bad at getting rid of what we think we know. We make a lot of assumptions. We bring a lot of baggage to the table. And I will tell you, if somebody gives you a new idea and the first thing you thought is, I've heard it before, it's never going to work, it's a silly idea, congratulations, you're illiterate in today's world. And you will be part of the 40% that won't be relevant in any significant way in the next 5 years. Your first thought has to be, how do we get it done? Your answer may be, it's a silly idea, it's never going to work. But if you are the one that shuts it down immediately, you will be part of the 40%. Thanks for having me. There's my information. Anybody who wants a deck, you can send me a note. I'm happy to send it to you. I'll park it in a Dropbox account, and you guys can all participate in it. And if you have any questions, send me a note. I'm happy to help. Thank you.